morning. Something I've done, I think this is the third time since I started preaching, was you change what you have planned. Today's plan was to talk about this week and next week some words that Jesus says from the cross. And we're going to do that next week, and then we have Palm Sunday and Easter. Today, I shifted a bit. We all have plans in life, right? And a vision for where you see yourself going, your family going, your church going, right? Hopes and dreams. And sometimes those plans don't always go the way you think. Or sometimes you end up where you know kind of God was leading you, but your path there, you've got a good idea for how God should get you there, and it never quite goes that way, right? When I was a kid, for some reason it was Sunday mornings. And I'd be up and I'd be kind of waiting. We were going to be leaving for church soon, and I would sit down on the couch and I'd watch TV and I'd flip through the channels, and somehow I always ended up watching these old boxing matches on TV. And so I was kind of fascinated by it as a kid. And I remember when I was young hearing about Mike Tyson, right? Youngest heavyweight champion ever. And he was being interviewed once. And these reporters were kind of asking him about his opponent, and they were saying, what are you going to do? He's going to move this way and that way, and he can get you cornered, and he can do this and this and this that we don't know if you're really prepared for. And he was good, and he had a big head about it, and he was mean. And he looked at the reporters and he said, yeah, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And you know what? I get a sense that whether it's with the recent news or with something else, a lot of people here today, you feel like you can get punched in the mouth sometimes. You got a plan, and the world doesn't always, and other people don't always go along with that. So what do you do? Whatever that challenge is, whatever fight you're in, when you get punched in the mouth, what do? You can throw in the towel. You can give up. You can roll over. Or you can fight back, right? You can keep pushing forward for that dream and that vision. And you can say, just because things didn't go the way I hoped or the way I saw it, I know who's still in control. And I know the God that I serve. And I can keep walking even if it's with a black eye and a busted jaw. We're going to be in 1 Samuel today. And we're going to look at an old story. It's one of those stories in the Bible that even if you never set foot in a church, you've probably heard it. It's a favorite of sports analogies, a David and Goliath story. And it opens with a nation and with an army and with a king that have been punched in the mouth. They thought things were going well. They're in this conflict, in this war with the Philistines. The Israelites are fighting the Philistines. And they find themselves in a situation that was kind of uncommon for them. So Saul's been king for a little while. Saul has won a lot of battles. And now they find themselves afraid. And the successes of the past seem far off. You ever been there before? Where you look back and you're like, gosh, it feels like forever since I've had a win. You ever get so physically sick and you're sick for like weeks at a time, whether it's like just really seriously sick or just like that nagging cold that never goes away. And then you're like, I can't even remember the last time I felt good. You ever experienced that before? And that's what's going on with Israel's army. They've been kind of beaten down, and they can't remember what it's like to win. Can't remember what it's like to feel good. So in 1 Samuel, in chapter 17, what's happened is there's this valley, and on each side of the valley, the Israelites are on one side, and the Philistines are on the other side. And they're not fighting. They're just lined up, ready to fight, kind of taunting the other one. Well, Israel's not doing any taunting. They're the ones being taunted. And this giant Goliath, so Goliath is probably about the size of Shaq. He's like 7 foot tall. He's a few hundred pounds. He's a big, strong, tough guy. Like when I stand next to somebody that's like 6'4" or 6'5", I think they're huge. All right? Like, you know, tack on another half foot or so. Make them big and strong. You put armor on them. You give them a sword and a big spear. And that's not somebody I probably want to go, hang around with when they're saying they want to kill me, right? So what happens is every day, Goliath is coming down into the valley, and he comes up to the Israelites, and he taunts them. Verse 8 of chapter 17, it says, Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, who do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us. Then the Philistine said, this day I defy the ranks of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other. Verse 11, on hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. So it's one thing, right? It's one thing if just the lowest ranking member of Israel's army and just the smallest guy there is afraid of Goliath, right? Even if there was a big battle, it's like that guy's probably staying away from him. That guy's not going to try and challenge Goliath in that fight. He's going to go somewhere else and fight. But it's not just that guy that's afraid. It's everybody that's afraid. And it's their king that's afraid. The Israelites, their army, they have no one to look to. No one believes they can win. And if they get sent out to fight Goliath one-on-one, they know they're going to die. It's already kind of been decided in their own minds. I heard something recently that I liked. I was listening to this podcast on leadership and tough things in life and how you get through that. And they were reading this book, and the author writes, until death, all defeat is psychological. It's all in your head. And for the Israelites, it's all in their head. And then David shows up. So Samuel's already gone and anointed David as the next king. And David's already kind of been in Saul's court, in the king's court. He's been playing the harp for him. And Saul's become a little jealous of David because he's young, he's going to be the next king, he's good looking, he's charismatic, people like him. David's one of Saul's armor bearers. And David's dad sends David to the battle. And he gives him some bread and some cheese. He says, take this to your brothers. So his brothers are all in the army. And he says, take this food to your brothers and take this to their commanding officer. So you see what the dad's doing here is he's like, hey, your brothers could probably use a good meal. And also the guy that's in charge of them, make sure he's taken care of too, because then he'll take care of my sons. And so David shows up, and all this commotion is going on with Goliath. And he sees Goliath coming out, and he makes his proclamation like he makes it every day, and everyone's kind of afraid. And I imagine after a while, like when Goliath's out there shouting, they all just kind of have their heads down. And when he's like, just send somebody out here to fight me, they're all just kind of like, yeah, maybe somebody else will do it. It's like if somebody came in here and was saying something like that, and I just put my head down, I'm like, you know what, maybe John's good. He can take care of it. Let's send Kevin out there. And David looks around and he's like, excuse me, don't you remember who you are? Don't you remember the God that you serve? He could tell him, sure, it looks like you got punched in the mouth. And it looks like your plan got thrown off. And it looks like you might be afraid of what the future holds. But have you also forgotten what God is in control? And so David says, I'll fight him. None of you want to fight him? I'll fight him. And it's not because he's got this big head about it. He knows the risk. He knows who Goliath is and what he's capable of. But he also knows who he serves. And so news gets to Saul. David will challenge Goliath. And Saul offers him everything. He says, if you win, not only do we then beat the Philistines and they'll be subject to us, there's an offer of wealth. He says, I'm going to give, whoever defeats Goliath, I'm going to give you a bunch of stuff. I'll give you a bunch of money. You can marry one of my daughters. You can be part of the royal family. And then all of your descendants are going to be part of the royal family. So he's offered that to people. Still, no one's done it, but David's willing to do it. And this is the thing. Here's the thing, is it's the right season of the year, too, for this, is no one is fighting Goliath, and Saul offered, if you go and you fight Goliath and you beat him, you don't have to pay taxes anymore. And no one has taken him up on the offer. All right? Yeah, it's tax season right now. And I know, you've talked to your accountant or whatever, and they've said, this is how much you owe. And you're like, you know what? If I had to fight like a 7-foot-tall giant to never have to do this again, it would be worth it. And so David goes to Saul. He says, fine, I'll fight him. There's all this offer on the table. And Saul says, well, you're my armor bearer. You kind of work as a shepherd for your dad. At least take my armor. The king has got to have the best armor, right? He says, you can wear my armor. You can take my sword. And he puts it on, and David's like, David is not as big as Saul, all right? Saul is somebody that looks like a king. He's tall with broad shoulders, square jaw. He looks like somebody that should be in charge. And when he put on that armor, he probably looked pretty tough, like somebody you wouldn't want to mess with. And David's younger. He's smaller. He's a little puny. He's the smallest of his brothers, too. And he puts this armor on. He's like, I can't. I'm a sitting duck with this. I can't move. So instead, he just takes his normal clothes. And he goes down by a stream and he finds 5 smooth stones. And he has a sling, which is just a leather strap with a thicker piece of leather in the middle. You can put one of those stones in, you swing it around, and you can let it loose. And that's something that shepherds used. Because shepherds had to deal with animals trying to eat their sheep. And David even tells Saul, he's like, you know what? I've fought a lion and I've fought a bear to protect my flock. And those are no things to mess around with. So he's had his staff to guide his sheep. He's had a rod, which is more like a stick that sometimes they would throw, sort of like a spear, to scare off an animal or to hit it and injure it. And they have these slings with these stones so they could be pretty good at throwing around. He's like, I fought a lion, I fought a bear, I'll fight a giant. even if everyone else is afraid. And I'm going to do it with the tools that I know how to use. And so Goliath challenges again. And David answers. And in verse 45, I love this. And this is where the Bible is not G-rated, all right? Verse 45 to 47 in 1 Samuel 17, David says, "You come against me with sword, spear, and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord God Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." So he says, this is David saying, take notice. I've heard what you're saying. This army is God's army, and you're defying them. So that means you're defying God. And I know what's going on here. They might be afraid of you. I'm not afraid of you. He says, "This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down. I'll cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and wild animals, and the world will know that there is a God in Israel." See what I mean? The Bible is not G-rated. It says, "All those gathered here will know that it's not by the sword or the spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you all into our hands." David knows what it looks like. He's not a big guy. Goliath's a giant. He's got a leather sling and some stones. Goliath is decked out in armor with a sword and a spear. And David knows, when I win this fight, no one's going to look at it and say that's because David is such a good warrior. They're going to say, no way he won that without God's help. So David runs at Goliath. And as he's running, he takes that smooth stone, one of those 5, and he puts it in that sling. And he raises it above his head, and he lets it go. And it sinks right into Goliath's head, right into the center of his skull. And he falls down. David grabs Goliath's sword from him, and he beheads him right there. And Israel wins. Now, like the Israelites, we've all had our victories and our defeats. And we can get pretty beaten up. And when we get beaten up and when we get punched in the mouth and we have that defeat that's in our heads, we kind of forget what God is capable of. And we forget who we serve. You know, David isn't the hero here. God's the hero in this story. David is just a person that said and remembered, this is who we serve. It could have been David. It could have been any of them. It could have been Saul. But they had all forgotten what God they serve. Oftentimes when we have these challenges in life and we're going down this path that God leads us down, is we feel like we're not qualified to do it. You ever been there? Plenty of soldiers in Israel's army probably looked at Goliath and they said, you know what? There are better guys here than me. And there are better people equipped for this work than me. And they might have said, you know, I've been in a lot of fights and I'm lucky to be alive. No way I'm going to go and challenge that guy. And there's a saying I like, and you hear it in churches, and I'm sure many of you have heard it before, is God doesn't call the qualified, God qualifies the called. And so whatever that challenge is in your life, and wherever along your path you've been punched in the mouth, and you're inclined maybe to shrink back, and you find yourself afraid to take the next step, you find yourself afraid to stay in the ring and stay in the fight, I ask you to remember this. When you say you're not qualified, on your own, you know what? You're right. But none of us are in this alone. We serve a God that is right there with us, that's right there in the fight with us in all of the tough times. And he says, you know what? You're right. On your own, you fall short. But with me, I will get you there. God doesn't call us to something just to leave us high and dry on how to get there. When God's with us, fear gets kind of cast out or pushed to the side. Any fears we have kind of get overwhelmed by a courage that God gives us. C.S. Lewis wrote that courage is not simply one of the virtues, but every virtue at its testing point. What he's saying is, when the time comes when you're going to be tested in life, it's going to take courage no matter what. Because there's going to be something that you're afraid of and something that you're uncertain of. And we don't like uncertainty, right? It's not something a lot of us sign up for. But we can look to God and we say, you know what? God's shown up every step along the way in my life and in those lives of people around me. And we can look at their stories. We can look at the stories right here. And we see God's track record. It's perfect. He's batting 1,000. He's always there, just like he says he will be. Now, he's not always there the way sometimes we would like him to show up. But the way God shows up is always better than what I have in mind. I have had all sorts of plans in my life for how it should go. And you know what? I thank God regularly that all those prayers of mine weren't answered the way I wanted them to be. Because God's way of handling it has been so much better, beyond anything I can think of. Something we're going to dive into in a few weeks. And I'll tell this story again in a few weeks after Easter. It's about fear. You like Animal Planet? Do you like those, like the animal documentaries? Or like if you ever watch like Planet Earth on Netflix, and it's like all this cool stuff about nature and animals and all this stuff. And I was reading this book, the author Levi Lusko, and he writes about lions. I like lions. I like going to the zoo. You see these things are, it's like I'm glad there's a big thick piece of glass between me and it. And male lions, they don't do a whole lot. Female lions, they do the work, okay? So like every wife in the room just was like, yeah. Mm-hmm. So the female lions, they do the bulk of the hunting, all right? And so say there's some gazelle or whatever they're going to hunt that day. They'll go out and they'll hunt them. But the male lions sometimes play a role. Sometimes they take a nap. Sometimes they play a role. Now, what happens is male lions, like if you ever go to the zoo and you look at a male lion, you look at a female lion, which one's more intimidating looking? The male lion, right? It's got this big mane, it's bigger, it's stronger, it's heavier. So what happens is if there's like all these animals these lions want to eat, the male lions go to where they can be seen by those animals, all right? And the female lions, they go and they hide. They'll get down in some grass where they kind of blend in, and they hide there. And they kind of are on each side of the animals they're hunting. And the male lions roar. If you ever hear a lion roar, it is terrifying. It will scare you down in the pit of your stomach. And these animals, they run from it. And they run away from those lions. The female lions, they come out of hiding, and they pick off the slowest ones. Now, the animals were smarter, and they knew what was going on. The safest thing to do would be to run towards the male lions. The male lions aren't good at hunting. They're not good at killing. Some of them might get killed by these male lions, but not nearly as many if they run towards the females. If they ran towards the roar, if they ran towards what they're afraid of, they would be better off. And oftentimes, our fear in life is a good indication of the direction we need to go, and that's towards it and not away from it. Every one of those soldiers in Israel's army was afraid of Goliath. And if any one of them would have stood up and said, no, this is God's army, God is who I serve, no one's going to defy us, they could have went out there and did the same thing David did. And we can be afraid about what comes next. But when we make God central in our lives, we do it for our lives first, us first, you. And we do it in our family. And we do it in our church. And in our community. Things start to change. And in order to get to that point, we all got to overcome whatever fear we have in life. In Isaiah 58, there's something going on. And the Israelites, they're not doing what they're supposed to do, which is kind of a theme in the Old Testament. Like the Israelites do what they're not supposed to do, bad stuff happens. They do what they're supposed to do, good stuff happens. A lot like our life, right? They're not fasting the way God intended. And in Isaiah 58, verses 8 and 9, if they were to start fasting like they intended, this is what God says, then your light will, or this is what Isaiah writes, then your light will break through like the dawn, and your healing will quickly appear. Then your righteousness will go before you, and the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. Then you will call, and the Lord will answer. You will cry for help, and he will say, here I am. And so today, it doesn't have to be fancy. If you find yourself afraid of what the next step is, and you might find God sitting right there next to you talking about, this is the direction you need to go. And I know it's scary, and I know you're tired, and I know you feel like you've been punched in the mouth, but you put me right in the middle of your life where I'm supposed to be. My light will break through like the dawn, and my healing will quickly appear. You catch that word? Quickly appear. He doesn't hold it back. And we cry out for help, and we cry out and we say, God, I'm afraid. I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do. And you know what his response is? His response isn't, well, you know what? You messed up here, here, and here, all along the way. So forget about you, and why don't you just experience that for a little while? No. We cry out for help, and God says, here I am. Today, we're going to take communion together. I'm going to ask the ushers to come forward and distribute the elements. And the thing, as we take communion together today, and we come to this Easter season, I think back to not just Jesus on the cross, but when Jesus comes into the world. And when Joseph and Mary are told that they're going to have a son, the angel tells them, and he will be called Emmanuel, which means God with us. And so my reminder to you today is that his name is Emmanuel, which means God with us. And he came to be with you. And so today, if you're crying out to God and you're saying, I need help, I don't know what to do, I can't make sense of everything that's happened up until now, Jesus comes and he says, my name is Emmanuel, which means God with us, and I have come here to be with you and sit here with you. And he says those words that Isaiah prophesied about. He says, here I am. Let's pray, and then the ushers will give out the elements. God, thank you for meeting us here. You are a God that shows up. You are with us through thick and thin, through the good times and the bad. And God, even when we are afraid, you come alongside us and you give us hope and you give us courage and you help us set our feet forward and walk into the unknown and walk into a chaotic world that we can't make sense of all the time. But we know who's in control. God, we pray these things in your Son's name.